You've scrolled through the feeds,
Right, right.
all those, sun-soaked plazas, the amazing street food photos that just scream brave new beginnings, somewhere exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like this endless adventure, doesn't it? A perfect fresh start.
And look, that feeling is real for a bit.
Yeah.
There's definitely that initial buzz, the novelty of everything being new and different. It is exciting. That's the picture you see.
But the sources we've been looking into, they paint a much more complicated picture. They show the moments you don't see online.
Yeah.
Like that feeling of being totally overwhelmed. Maybe you're on the floor next to some half-built IKEA thing, possibly even crying.
Right.
Not because the furniture itself is the big deal, but because you suddenly realize you have to figure out even this simple thing all by yourself in a place where, well, nothing feels quite familiar yet.
Or, yeah, that quieter thing, waking up day after day, physically you're in a new place, but your dreams, they're always like vividly back where you came from.
Mm-hmm. That
Feeling that your mind is still sort of living somewhere else entirely.
It's just so incredibly human. And that's really what we want to unpack today. The significant emotional and psychological weight that often comes with moving to a new country.
Yeah.
It goes way beyond just the logistics or the, shiny opportunities. We've looked at personal stories, psychological takes, research, quite a stack of material, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission here is really to understand why these feelings hit so hard, and maybe more importantly, what the material suggests can actually help you navigate it all.
It's really about getting that relocation isn't just, changing your address. It's this profound disruption to your sense of who you are, your connections, your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And these sources, they really highlight just how deep that impact can be.
Okay, so let's start right there. You mentioned that initial rush, the honeymoon phase, but then from these accounts, something shifts. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. The material we looked at pretty consistently points to a period often kicking in around maybe the 3-month mark where that initial excitement just sort of fades and something much harder takes its place.
Culture shock.
Well, yeah, that's the common term. But these sources describe it with such rawness. It's marked by this deep exhaustion, self-doubt starts creeping in, maybe surprisingly high levels of anxiety.
Exhaustion just from living,
Yeah.
from doing everyday things.
Exactly that, because suddenly everything needs conscious thought. Simple tasks you barely noticed doing back home, knowing where to get milk, figuring out the post office, navigating buses, or, yeah, even putting together furniture.
Right.
They all become these complex little puzzles. You're constantly trying to read new social cues, dealing with language barriers, figuring out the unwritten rules. It's just this constant drain on your mental energy, and that leads to that feeling of just being completely wiped out.
That story about the dresser, the IKEA dresser, it really stuck with me, how a simple, practical problem just spirals into something emotional.
Precisely. That wasn't really about the flat pack furniture itself. The person writing described it as feeling not chosen. Like this sudden realization hit them that in that moment, there wasn't anyone nearby they could easily call for help, no established network yet.
Wow.
And it triggered this much deeper feeling, almost like being abandoned or having to face every single challenge totally solo.
And that sounds like it leads right into what the sources described as maybe the biggest challenge of all, loneliness.
Yes, it came up constantly. And it's more than just, being physically by yourself. These accounts describe this really profound sense of disconnection. Even if you're out and about, surrounded by people, the interactions can feel kind of shallow, surface level.
Okay.
One piece of research we saw really highlighted how cultural norms around just socializing can really affect this.
Yep.
In cultures that maybe prioritize efficiency or privacy more, building those dear connections can feel a lot slower, much more challenging than maybe in cultures where relationship building is more upfront and immediate.
Like that example you mentioned, comparing the writer meetups, where one setting felt like it was all about individual work, laptops out, quiet,
Yeah, productivity first.
and the other was more about chatting, sharing, laughing first. Like the connection happened before the task.
That specific observation is really telling, I think, because it shows how the actual environment you land in can sort of implicitly make it easier or harder to form those bonds.
Right.
When the culture isn't really designed for the kind of easy, spontaneous connection you might be used to, that feeling of being an outsider can just get deeper.
And alongside that disconnection from other people, there's this really strong pull towards the past, isn't there?
Huh?
Homesickness. But it sounds like it's more than just missing people.
Oh, absolutely. It's missing the familiarity, not just faces, but all the little sensory details, the way the air smells after rain back home, or the specific layout of the grocery store, even just the ease of finding certain products. One source really pointed out the unexpected hassle immigrants face, just finding things like specific foods or even, hair care products that actually work for them, because the market just isn't set up for their
It's
needs.
a constant little reminder.
It is. It's a constant reminder you're not in your usual ecosystem. It's those small daily frictions that just add up and up.
Mm.
And psychologically, these sources talk about this phenomenon. Some call it cognitive immobility, where your mind can get, like, quite literally stuck in the past.
Stuck.
Yeah, dwelling on memories of home, sometimes even kind of idealizing the place you left, maybe as a way to cope with disappointments in the new reality.
And is that connected to why so many accounts mention dreaming about home,
Yeah.
like every single night?
That certainly seems to be how it manifests for a lot of people. Your
No.
subconscious is just grappling with this huge change. Those dreams, well, they can be comforting, right? A return to what's known. But they can also make it harder to fully kind of anchor yourself in the present, in the new place.
Right.
It's a really powerful sign that your internal world hasn't quite caught up with where you physically are.
So with all of this going on, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the homesickness, it kind of makes sense that your sense of identity might start to feel a bit shaky.
It's a huge challenge. That's what these sources suggest. Your identity is often so tied up in your context, isn't it? Your job title, your social circle, your role in the community.
Right.
Moving just disrupts all of that. If
Yeah.
you end up having to take a job that's maybe below your qualifications because of language issues or, accreditation problems,
Yeah.
or if your social standing just feels different, it can lead to real disappointment, confusion about who you even are in this new context. There's a definite sense of grieving involved, grieving the loss of your familiar self and that social fabric you left behind.
And relationships too, both the old ones back home and trying to build new ones, they seem to require a lot of extra effort.
They really do. Staying connected with people back home is so important, but, time zones, busy schedules,
Mm-hmm.
it makes those easy, spontaneous chats really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
You miss out on the little everyday updates. Scheduling calls can start to feel kind of formal compared to just, dropping by someone's house or grabbing a quick coffee.
And then building new deep connections where you are.
Yeah.
That's a whole other mountain to climb.
Absolutely. On top of the cultural differences we already talked about, there's often this transient nature in many expat communities.
People coming and going.
Exactly. You might meet wonderful people, really connect, but there's often this unspoken awareness that they, or maybe you, might move on eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can make people a bit hesitant to invest too deeply, maybe,
Yeah.
or it leads to these cycles of connection and then really painful goodbyes.
We've talked a lot about the emotional and psychological side of things, but the sources also touch on the practical hurdles, right? The ones that just add to the stress load. And they're not just minor annoyances, are they?
Oh, not at all. These sources really highlight how the constant grind of navigating complex bureaucracy, dealing with translations. I think one person mentioned spending over $1,000 just on official translations,
Wow.
finding storage for your things, or even just the daily task of shopping for specific items. It can be relentlessly draining.
Like needing certain clothes sizes that aren't common there, or makeup shades that just aren't stocked, or trying to explain a complicated medical history to a doctor who doesn't quite speak your
Or
language.
finding electronics that aren't marked up ridiculously just
Yeah.
because they're imported. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. These aren't just small inconveniences. They feel like daily reminders that the system, the place, it wasn't really built with you in mind.
Right.
And it takes extra time, extra energy, often extra money. And that constant friction, that feeling of having to work harder just for basic things, it definitely feeds into that overall exhaustion and feeling like an outsider that these sources describe so vividly.
So, okay, it sounds like a pretty overwhelming mix of challenges then: emotional disconnect, grieving the past, all this practical friction. Where does the material point in terms of, building resilience, finding a way through all this?
Well, the most consistent theme, really, across all the sources for navigating this, it comes down to connection.
Building that network in the new place.
Yes, and really actively doing it. It's usually not enough to just hope connections will happen. The sources really emphasize being proactive,
Like how?
like joining groups based on hobbies, maybe sports, taking classes, volunteering, finding people who share your interests. It gives you a kind of structured way to meet people and start building that local support system.
Mm.
And these new friends, they often become incredibly important, almost like a chosen family abroad.
And what about that lifeline back home? Does that still matter?
Oh, absolutely crucial. Even with the challenges of distance and time, maintaining those connections with loved ones from your home country gives you this vital sense of continuity and
Right.
understanding.
Yeah.
They knew you before all this. They get your reference points. Those calls, even if they're quick, can be such a huge comfort when you're feeling really low.
Okay. Connection is key.
Yeah.
What else did the sources suggest helps?
Well, really prioritizing your mind and body. The link between physical well-being and mental resilience is just so strong.
Mm.
Eating as well as you can manage, getting some exercise, even if it's just walking around and exploring your new area, making sure you get enough sleep. These really fundamental self-care things are critical. They act like shock absorbers when you're under so much stress and uncertainty.
And mentally, any specific strategies?
Yeah, the material frequently brought up mindfulness practices.
Like meditation.
Could be meditation or
Yeah.
just taking moments to consciously, be in the present, practicing gratitude, even for small things that are going okay, and crucially, allowing yourself to actually acknowledge and feel the difficult emotions, the sadness, the frustration, without judging yourself for having them.
So not trying to just push through or ignore the bad feelings.
Exactly that. Acceptance of those feelings like, yes, I do miss home right now, or I am feeling lonely, or I am frustrated with this paperwork that's actually a key step.
Okay.
It's not about resigning yourself to being unhappy forever, but about not fighting against the reality of how you feel in that moment. And cultivating self-compassion came up a lot too, just being kind to yourself during what is, let's face it, a profoundly challenging time.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about finding purpose? Did that come up?
Yes, definitely. Being proactive and finding some kind of meaningful engagement seemed to be a really powerful strategy.
Like work?
Could be work, yeah. Or if paid work is difficult to find right away, maybe finding volunteer opportunities in the community. Journaling also helps some people process complex feelings.
So having something that gives you a sense of contributing, maybe.
Exactly. The sources suggest that engaging in something that feels bigger than yourself, contributing somehow, or even just working towards a specific goal, whether that's professional or personal, can create this sense of forward momentum. And that can really combat that feeling of being stuck or isolated. It shifts your focus outward a bit.
And going back to those daily practical difficulties, that whole not designed for you reality, does that ever get any easier?
The sources suggest that it really does, significantly over time. While it's definitely a challenge at the start, you gradually learn how to navigate the system.
Mm-hmm.
You find the shocks you need, you figure out the paperwork quirks, you discover little workarounds. It slowly moves from being this constant energy drain to just a manageable part of daily life.
Okay.
And sometimes you even get quite good at carving out your own path within that new environment. It's
Yeah.
maybe about reframing those hurdles, seeing them as challenges to be learned and navigated, rather than these insurmountable walls.
And I think through all of this, the sources were really clear on one thing.
Yeah.
Struggling with this stuff is part of the deal. It's normal.
Absolutely, unequivocally. Every single account, every psychological insight we looked at reinforced that experiencing these difficulties, the loneliness, the culture shock, the identity wobbles, all of it is completely, totally normal.
Right.
It is not a sign that you personally are failing or that you're weak. It's just the natural human response to a massive, massive life change.
So if you are feeling overwhelmed by it all, reaching out for more support is like a really important step.
Oh, absolutely. The material really stressed that seeking professional help, whether that's through counseling, therapy, maybe employer-provided programs like EAPs if you have access, that's a valid and often really essential step.
Especially maybe if you had mental health stuff beforehand.
Exactly. Moving abroad isn't some magic cure, and it can definitely exacerbate pre-existing conditions. Recognizing you need support and actually accessing it, that's a sign of strength, absolutely not weakness.
So looking back at everything we've kind of touched on from this deep dive, from that initial excitement to the maybe unexpected weight of loneliness and that constant friction of just navigating a world not quite built for you.
Yeah.
It really is a huge undertaking, isn't it?
It asks a tremendous amount from a person, yeah.
Yeah.
Emotionally, practically, but the sources also really do offer a path forward. It seems to be through that intentional connection, that rigorous self-care, finding purpose, and kind of embracing the challenge as just part of the whole process.
And thinking about that image we started with,
Yeah.
dreaming about home every night, maybe
Mm.
even years after you've moved,
Hmm.
it does leave you with a pretty big question based on all this material.
It really does.
If your mind still finds its way back to the place you left while you're sleeping, and if the new country, even with your best efforts, never feels entirely like it was designed for you, does home maybe stop being about a physical building or even a specific country? Does it become more about, I don't know, the internal resilience you manage to build and the connections you nurture, regardless of where you actually happen to be standing on the map?
That's a deeply personal question, I think, for anyone who's ever navigated that kind of journey.